Hey, everyone.
Hey, folks.
Hey.
Happy New Year.
So I haven't actually checked the Slack channel if anyone saw my ping, but I just moved over stuff from the agenda that were tabled and moved them over for today. And I'm not entirely sure if all these folks are going to be present today or confirmed to talk about whatever topic was added. So we'll just go through the list and cover what we can and cover what people want to talk about. So if there's any last minute items, feel free to toss it into the doc and we will probably have time to get to it. And I can share my screen if it's helpful. All right, cool. Yeah, so feel free to toss your name in the top there. And then I added, let's see, it's 9:02. Yeah, we can get started. So I added the first agenda item here, just to call out that the OpenSSF is doing a vote for the TAC, the Technical Advisory Committee. Anyone's that's been active in the OpenSSF and the projects and any of the working groups like today is eligible to vote. You have to register to vote, and I added a link here. And I think registration to become a voter ends this Friday. So definitely sign up. I can't remember the process for like nominations to be on the TAC. If you're interested, probably go try to dig that up. Someone on the call might actually know and can speak to that if you would like. But yeah, definitely register and look out for the notice to vote. The TAC is like oversees all of the working groups and has some responsibilities in the foundation. Cool. And then, yes, and now Mark, you want to talk about the awesome new website?
Yeah, so I just I don't want to spend a lot of time on it unless people have questions or feedback. But our contract with Projects by IF has ended. They redesigned the website. Dev had presented it at the last meeting back, I think, which was in like November. And so that's all submitted now. If you have any feedback or suggestions for improvements, obviously we'd like to hear them. Hopefully this better explains the concepts of SLSA. There's still more work that we need to do. There's 2 open pull requests around rejiggering terminology that I kind of want to work through because I'd like to avoid, instead of having a big long glossary with a bunch of terms you have to learn, I'd rather avoid the need for terminology at all and avoid jargon, or to kind of define things in line. So I'm trying to work through that on how best to describe that. But otherwise, after we have this rewrite, I personally am going to be working on going through the various GitHub issues around things that aren't explained well. For example, in a previous meeting, we had talked about expanding the model to include, like when you have a mirror of a repo, like there's an upstream repo, and then Debian has its own mirror with patches, etc. So the content changes will come after that.
And this is the website repo, right? Under docs. Is that where the website is?
Exactly. It's under the docs directory. Yeah.
And then these are the issues. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. There's a huge long. How many issues do we have now? Lots. So hopefully over the next few months, that'll be my focus, is kind of like whittling those down and actually resolving some of these.
Cool. Yeah, I think it looks great. I like it. I like just watching these balls roll down. But anyway, any questions, anyone, about the new website? No? All right, cool.
And we have a logo now too, which I was happy about.
This
The
one,
little, yeah, the little.
that thing's a little, what's the goose's role then?
Well, the goose doesn't make a very good icon.
Yeah. Maybe like just the motto or something, like
Yeah.
when you go to basketball games. All right,
The
cool.
goose, if you click on the community link, Kim, you'll see the goose.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I think we do need a vote for the naming of the goose. I should get the governing board intact to make that their top priority. Anyway.
Hey, I was going to give feedback on the site quickly. And by the way, this is
Yeah.
my first meeting. I'm Aaron Baki. Nice to meet
Hey, Aaron.
everybody. So brand new to, I guess, the supply chain security concept. Super excited to get involved with you guys. So feedback on the site, right? Because I kind of was able to navigate there and kind of get my hand on this. I thought it was super helpful. The explanation of the levels is really helpful to kind of visually grasp what I should be thinking about trying to achieve. So I really appreciated the initial layout at the top, and then kind of really drilling down to the details and kind of providing me a roadmap of what I think I should be working towards. So just quick feedback. I liked it a lot, and I sent it to my manager, and he said, "Yeah, this is great. Like, this is really helpful for us to kind of think about where we should be heading." So yeah.
Cool. And then I was just curious while you were talking, because we've had some projects now trying to reach the different SLSA levels, and it'd be good to maybe showcase more of them on here. And I'm not quite sure if we're doing that yet, but TBD could be cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, welcome and thanks for the feedback.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, cool. And now we have, I'm not sure if Tom is here today, if we're gonna put on this for next meeting. Tom,
Howdy.
Oh, yay. Hey, Tom.
Howdy. Hopefully you can see me and hear me.
Yeah. Do you want to screen share, or do you want me to show anything, or you're just gonna talk to us? Any that is fine.
Let's do both. I'll start with a little bit of talking, and then I'll do some showing, and we'll just play it by ear.
Awesome.
So my overall, one of the things I'm trying to kind of bring up is a lot of the problems, all the questions we're trying to figure out is stuff that, like, from the community I come from the Nix community, that has been in some sense doing a lot of these sorts of things by necessity for a while. Like, the intentions have been different, but the things that got put in place just coincidentally tend to be very similar, which is this idea of, hey, you want to have everything clearly specified. You want also a lot of declarations, and they tend to map very well. Again, it seems to be by accident onto the SLSA levels, particularly things like source, build, provenance, right? Some of the other stuff is like maybe like more policy driven, like, okay, where you have a 2-person review, right? That's more of a policy thing necessarily than about like build reproducibility. But because of that commonality and because it's so close, what I'm trying to say is I want to, like, we just talked about case studies. The existing experience that this community has had for 2 decades building this stuff is something I want to kind of have included in some way. And also to, like, steal the best ideas from and reuse some of the experience on, like, what works well, what are the bad decisions, what are the things that kind of get you stuck and end up not actually providing as much value as you would like. So I want to kind of showcase some of those things.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? Can you give us a really high level overview of what Nix is? I think maybe there's some on the call that don't even know, or if you're gonna get into that, go for it. Just to
yeah,
a little bit more context.
Yeah, that's actually part of the purpose, is to do some initial intro as well. Okay,
Okay,
so,
perfect.
yes, so what is Nix itself? We'll call it a meta build system. Right. It's not really going to be a build system itself. It's not going to replace, I don't know, make, CMake, NPM, your cargo compilers, things like that. But it helps orchestrate those things and put things into packages. And so in some sense, you could say it's replacing the functionality of the sorts of things that you would do with like RPM or Yum or APK, right? It's like a meta package orchestrator manager. or like a meta build system in some sense. So like inside of it is where you would run your other things, and it runs builds very declaratively. So when you start to specify what it is that you have to be very precise. So you go through the process of saying, here's where all my sources are, here's the mirrors, here's the hashes for those things, here's the revisions for those things, here's the build instructions, here's how you manage the outputs, here's how my patching is going to work. And once you specify all these things, now your builds are run in a very hermetic environment. So builds don't have access to, all the bad places they shouldn't be talking to, like home. They can't contact anything over the network. They can't do a lot of the sorts of bad things that, we're talking about when we say like hermetic builds. The benefit of this is that like you can get towards this idea and this dream of having, fully declarative systems, as well as like, basically what we're talking about in terms of software maturity of the SLSA levels. So what I was going to do was perhaps do a quick, like, here's the sorts of things that like you can do. There's pros and cons here. Like, so one of the big pros is like, there's a lot of experience in this ecosystem in solving exactly these problems. One of the cons is, well, usability is famously, difficult, or it's like hard necessarily to learn. So one of the things we're trying to work on is like improving that adoption. That's in the community. I've got a company where that's what we're working on, is making it so much easier for organizations to learn and adopt this system, because you get all these ancillary benefits. So I could do a quick little demo as to like what sort of information you have available to you. Let me see if I can do a share screen.
Sure. Do you have any links too for the project's homepage that we can link to in the notes?
nixos.org
Okay.
is that,
Sure.
my company's fluxdev.com, if you want to do a little shout out there. I could throw these into the
Sure.
into the article afterwards. And then I could kind of run us through a quick just demo that we threw together. This was along with Mike Lieberman, helped me kind of organize my thoughts and figure all this out. You should also be on the call. And then let's see if I could take over sharing. Is that visible?
It says you started sharing, but I don't see anything yet. There we go.
Oh, there we go.
It's working?
Yep.
All right. Actually, this is actually big enough so people can see. All right. So what I was going to go through is, in some sense, like, what are we talking about, and kind of just demo some of the benefits and kind of why this is useful, and maybe some of the ideas that I think are worth keeping. And so I'll just kind of run through this. Okay, so I'm looking at this is from the salsa.dev thing, listing about like what each of these requirements are. So like version control. So cool. If you go take a look at some of these packages, you see everything in there is specified. In this particular case, it's the hello package. Everything has like okay, here's where you originally got this thing. Here's the hashes of what they are. So that's kind of meets this requirement of things being version controlled. We want to make sure we have a verified history of all the packages that we have. I'm using hello usually and CowSA as my default packages for demonstration purposes. So we say this is version controlled. There's a few things going on here. So in GitHub, that's where Nix packages lives. That's the full description of everything in the Nix world. And it's a huge amount of open source software. It's got like as much or more than like the Arch user repository. It's all this stuff, and it's specified in this way to say like, here's all the build inputs. Here's what the meta descriptions are. Here's the build instructions. Here's like how to install this package. This is CowSay. It looks like we're installing a few things there. So it's all this stuff that is very similar to what, if you're familiar with like the deb world, is like in a package build, or that might be the Arch world, the control files, things like that. So all this is kind of runnable. All right, what else? Retained indefinitely. Let's see what I forgot what I put for that. Oh yeah, so we have this is all like in Git and GitHub. So like just the other day, I was going back to like 2013 and building like a version of OpenSSL, like with old compilers, with old everything. So it was as representative of like Heartbleed as possible from like way back when. So I thought that was kind of cool, being able to have that version control and rebuild your history in the past. Nice. So that was retained indefinitely, or that's an example of that. Two-person review, I mean, that's just policy. So you could just say, hey, how you manage your Git and source repositories is a matter of policy. You could apply whatever you wish. This is the like public Nix packages, but if you were a company or an organization, you could apply additional things on top. We don't, Nix packages itself doesn't do two-person, even though it's encouraged and usually takes place. It's not 100% thing at this point. Scripted builds. So let's go see what I have for scripted builds. Okay, so right now we're running a scripted build for Hello, and it's doing a thing. Cool. That's a scripted build. Hopefully should finish without error. It's the Hello world, so cool. We've reached this like Solstice level 1. Build service. For build service, we have examples of, we have this particular type of builder called Hydra. It basically is aware of all this machinery and is like a CI system for it in particular. But you could imagine doing similar builds in GitHub Actions or GitLab or any other, whatever your CI system is. Let's see what else. I'll try to run through these a little faster. Build as code. What did I do for this? So this package that we talked about, this CalSay package, cool. Like here is code. It's kind of similar to JSON. It's kind of like JSON with functions, we'll call it. That gives you like all the information you need and describes how to build this particular package. This is CalSay, so I guess it depends on Perl. Good luck with Perl. Ephemeral environment. I'll do an example of this. Is where I want to build something and it fails because you could see it tries to contact example.com, and as you're running builds, it doesn't exist. So like all these things are kind of isolated. That's an example of having this kind of built into the system by default. Ephemeral environments, same thing. We don't have contact and networks and stuff like that. Isolated. What did I do for that? Yep, same. It's the same example for those three, just because they're very similar. Parameterless, same thing. Like I'm just building these things by saying, make this thing, and there's like no parameters here. It's just saying, hey, what package do I want to build, and that's it. Hermetic, we covered as well, in the sense that like, hey, I can't contact outside world. I can't contact home directories. Like I'm closed away. Reproducible, I mean, that's kind of where something's got to get easier or harder. So here I'll try to reproduce that that hello package again from scratch, and hopefully it recompiles to be the same exact thing. We do a pretty good job of this. It's not 100%. Okay, so this time it worked, and it was the same. We do keep track of this. Looks like we're at like 99.87, so we're still trying to get a few more nines out of the system, but reproducibility is pretty good because of kind of the history of trying to keep track of all this information. Provenance. Let's go into the provenance information. So all of these things, when you stash them away somewhere, has all this information. The format's a little wonky, but it's content-wise, it's very similar to a lot of the formats we've been talked about in the SLSA formats. So some of this information I actually think is relevant to kind of preserve and have similar analogs in the SLSA. So for example, we keep track of like both the hash of the stuff as it's expanded on disk, as well as like what it is compressed. So like if you go fetch this thing off of this website, you'll go get this same hash. And then when you expand everything out to disk, you'll end up with this hash. It also keeps track of like what other packages it depends on. So this hello package, right, depends on, well, itself, and also depends on glibc. So you're keeping track of like library dependencies, runtime and build time references. And then everything is signed and cached. So this particularly was cached by like upstream, but you could also have this cached by multiple people. So that's kind of availability of provenance. Authenticated, I forgot what I did for this. Yeah, more signatures, I guess. You could see, sorry, where are my signatures here? Yeah, so we got signatures here showing that like, hey, this is a thing that's signed. And then the next package here, you can see it has no signature. So the tracking of signatures and not signatures is like a thing that is kind of talked about or managed. Service generated. Yep. So we have this Hydra service that actually does builds on our behalf so that people don't have to go and do this on their own. That, you know, these builds get done, they get logs, they get all that information kind of tracked for you. So that's kind of interesting. That's useful. What else? Service generated, non-falsifiable. Like, cool. Like, this is a signature. Like, I can't really fake that signature because I don't have the key. So that's a little bit of crypto goodness. Dependencies complete. So this is listing like, here are the full dependencies of this particular package. It needs glibc. It also needs like a few other like stuff for internationalization and stuff. And that's all being tracked. All recursive dependencies are tracked. So this is both for build time and runtime. Let's see if I change this line and add derivation. Cool. Now I have a list of all the build time dependencies. So like, for example, to fetch some of the sources, I had to use curl. Well, we answer the question of like, well, what version of curl did you use to fetch your dependencies? And transitively, essentially all the way down. So that's kind of something that we're got some time with. And the last items here, I'm pretty sure security, an assessment. I just said, hey, like these are policy questions, right? How you do some of your security things, how you do manage your access, who your super users are. This is governance and security, not necessarily answered directly by technology, but perhaps can be informed of it. So that's kind of like the whirlwind tour of the SLSA levels from the perspective of someone who comes from this world. My overall intention is to try to infect the SLSA effort with like the best ideas and the best practices that we've kind of developed over time. And I guess I'll take any questions or thoughts.
Thanks so much. I have a question. That was a really great intro. I'll probably be referencing this video and going back to it because I feel like you covered a ton of stuff in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, I was trying to get through as fast as possible. Apologies for that.
No, it was great. I really liked it. I have two questions. Well, one is more of a request of like, if there is anything, if you could take a look, or I'm happy to work with you to see if anything is missing from the SLSA provenance that is not, that you would need. Like if Nix were to use the SLSA provenance instead of what you currently have, what would be missing? That, or what changes would you make? That would be really useful to know like how practical is the SLSA provenance.
So I could actually give you a little bit. So, I mean, it's not the same format, but this is, I guess, the closest equivalent to it, which is our derivation format. And this kind of keeps track of all this, like all these inputs. The one biggest recommendation I would have is to cleanly separate the pure and impure parts of your provenance. So, for example, like timestamps of like builds, right? If we're going for reproducible builds, like a timestamp of a build is not something you want to have included in your provenance. You want your provenance to be essentially as pure as possible. You don't want state to come into play. And then you could have on the side, and then like it could be signed along with the pure and impure parts to have impure components, but I want to have that clean separation so that you have, right, I don't want to mix in, like specifically timestamps and logs all over the place into what should be a pure format. That's like one big item. Because really, in a sense, if you think about it, the provenance description for us, the provenance description is actually the build description. This is exactly how you run a build, and I should be able to ship this to other people and then go reproduce what I did. And then they could check themselves to see, like, is there a difference? Right, and that's a huge part of the auditability and after the fact being able to go and fix these issues. So capturing all these build instructions is another big piece. At first glance, a lot of like the SBOM efforts are very focused on like just capturing the source. I'm very keen on capturing all the actual arguments and environment variables and all the things that come into play. So I'd recommend that on that side of things. Did that?
Thanks.
Those are
Yeah,
kind of like some quick snapshot responses to the question.
Thanks. I might follow up with you to get maybe more detailed feedback. One other question I had is for Nix. Is this a closed system? Like in order to build something with Nix, all of your transitive dependencies also have to be within Nix? Or can you use Nix at the top level, but then import stuff from various places?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the nicest is everything is open source, because then we can get everything and work our way up and bootstrap our way to success. There are things that, for example, just for legal reasons we can't do, like NVIDIA drivers and CUDA and stuff like that. So that it is possible to bring in proprietary or closed source code. And the way you do that is you just specify, I'm bringing in this code. Here's how I fetch it and get it. It could be a download or whatever your source is. And then you just specify this is the hash. So by saying this is the hash, here's how to fetch it, here's how to bring it into the system, that's another way to bring stuff in from a binary based world. And that way you don't have to, not your entire world has to be from there. So like people are running like, games and stuff, and they've packaged Steam and Minecraft, right? So Minecraft isn't packaged with the Nix, but we could bring it in, right? So you could bring in software from other places from a binary only fashion. Sometimes you have to patch things. Sometimes you have to like patch the binary itself to make things work nicely, or set up an environment for that so everything exists in the right places. But that's kind of similar to the work you would have to do in any system.
Perfect, thanks.
Yep.
Tom, when you talked about usability challenges early on, did you mean for module maintainers or more for end users?
So, I mean, this is just kind of an endemic issue with the Nix community. From my perspective, it is very, it's geared towards the power user. So like, I've been working with this for like 10 years and I'm like, I'm comfortable with it. I like it. I know all the quirks. Initial users tend to sometimes have difficulties because there's so much thrown at them at once. Common confusion is like, oh, do I have to use the Nix OS operating system? Like, no, but it's really easy to get that kind of confused. And oh, is it a package manager? Is it a distribution? Is it a deployment tool? Right? There's a lot kind of thrown at you at once, and also it's a functional language. So like, usually Haskell people tend to like adopt it really nicely. If you're, because you're talking about like functions and purity and lazy evaluation, and that meshes well with that world. So that's what I mean by usability, which is like, it could be better, better documentation. Like, sadly, sometimes we're like, oh, the best documentation is source. We need to get better at that. So that's a Nix problem, not necessarily a Salsa problem. But that's kind of my take on from a usability perspective. But in terms of like usage, if you could hide some of those details, you could build frameworks such that like not everyone in your organization has to kind of dig into all of it. You could hide some of it from them so that they just get tools that either make it easier, or they hide it, or the rough edges are fixed. Also, I'm kind of working on this every week to go fix UX bugs and improve developer experience. So as always, it's a work in progress.
Right. I had wondered in part because at Active State, we've noticed sometimes with less sophisticated users, the only thing they trust less than sort of an out-of-the-box default is something that's a bit more complicated. So you can tell them it's more secure and explain why, but then they like see pieces of how it's more secure and they're like, whoa, that's freaky. I'm afraid of it now. So anyhow.
There's a lot of power underneath. And so there's a tension there between how much power do you throw at someone day one, and then how much do you kind of keep in reserve for day 100.
Okay,
I think I think in chat there were some questions, but I didn't quite see them. Let's see here. Let's see, Laurent. What am I gonna know? Let's go all the way back here. Reviews. Yeah, so Nix packages itself. So Nix packages is the like global description of how everything in the open source world is packaged. And if you decide to use Nix packages, again, you don't have to. You could do this all on your own. I wouldn't recommend it because it's a lot of work. But that's where all that lives. So the way we do reviews there is, we have some people who are like maintainers, you have people who are co-donors, and you ping each other for reviews. The policy generally is you're not going to merge your own PRs. You don't push to master. Again, there's some cases where that either has occurred, but like we're fixing policy issues and things like that. But again, if you're a company, normally what you're going to do is you're going to have your own organization software packaged in your own thing, like my company packages dot whatever, right? And for that, absolutely, you could apply whatever review policies you wish. You could also maintain your own fork of Nix packages and apply whatever policies on top of that you might wish. Improving that in the community is also a thing. That's the current status. Let's see here. Looks like Michael answered a few questions. Nix infect, yeah, that's good. Yeah, so a lot of the Nix package code lives in GitHub, and so it's whatever policies are working and applied there. That's for Nix packages. Again, you don't have to. You could have your own version of Nix packages that packages all your organization software hosted on. I mean, it doesn't even have to be hosted. It could just be a Git repo as you fly around. But again, that is a kind of source control policy that you apply. So I would say any policy applied to your source control, just apply it to your packages repository, and you'll inherit the same qualities. Whether you want every single commit signed or only tags, or how many people do review, or what tests have to pass. We are trying to get better at in Nix packages itself. We are trying to get better at having like more and more things be signed, and having more and more mandatory reviews. But it's also a matter of like, do you have enough people to do the work? We could always use more people. So my ulterior motive in this is also, to bring more people into this community.
So hang on. Sorry, I have a question about what you just said. So I understand if you're an org and you're building your own binary, you can trust your own policy. But if you're consuming a binary created by another org, how does that org prove that they actually did the code review and all this? Because it seems like your provenance information is saying it was reviewed, but how do I trust a package from someone else? Like, how do I trust? Like, if I want to run Envoy on my Linux machine, I'm not going to build it probably locally. I'm going to take that binary from GitHub and just say, hey, is it?
So because you have all the instructions. Yeah. So because you have all the instructions, I mean, if you want to build it yourself, absolutely. The binary substitution is available if you so wish. You could rebuild the world yourself, and that way you're not taking any binaries from anyone else. So it's right now, you're right. In some sense, you're trusting the Hydra, the NixOS organizations run Hydra to build things correctly for you and not lie to you. Absolutely, because that's what the signature really means, is I built this thing according to these instructions, and this was the output. You as an org could rebuild everything from scratch yourself, and maintain that, and keep that infrastructure alive. When it comes to like the Nix packages descriptions themselves, I mean, in a sense, this is very similar to all of the information that's maintained in like package build, or like any other distro package managing system, right? There's a whole bunch of there's trusted people who are then signing that, yes, this is the current state of the world. Nix packages is interesting because it's so much more open, and so like you could go see exactly what it is at all times. We got 300,000 commits or so. Let's go see what pull requests are going on. Okay, cool. Someone's updating, I don't know, stuff here, right? They're updating various packages, probably like bumping versions of, I don't know, his lib agent. What are they doing? They're bumping a version, and then they're bumping a hash. So normally what happens is other people then go into this thing, they see if it actually builds correctly, and then they'll verify this and emerges. So let's say no one's done a review yet. Looks like he's requested 2 people, the code owners, to do review. So hopefully they have time and come do that, and then this change gets merged in. That's kind of
Okay.
the process.
So if I understand correctly, every package is in the Nix OS repo. You don't have like packages like you'd have on, I don't know, Golang, where everyone they maintain their own packages. You basically own all the packages. You have a copy of them as a Nix package on your own org. Is that correct?
So Nix packages is the most popular and the largest set. You could have multiple ones in other places defined differently. But yeah, Nix packages is like probably the biggest one to reference. But you don't have to use it if you don't want to.
Yeah, and it should also be noted that Nix packages, like obviously they're doing code reviews on the packages themselves. They're not necessarily doing code reviews on the upstream code that they're building. So, which I know is also kind of a big open question in Salsa of like, how should we sort of differentiate, like I'm signing off on the package, I'm not signing off that the upstream source code that I'm building was actually good.
Yeah, that was kind of my underlying question. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, we just make it possible for you to trace back to what it is, right? So it looks like Luke GB is the maintainer of this. And if you want to find out like what the actual code was, right, you could have all the hashes and signatures available to you to go do like upstream code review. But like, no, I mean, just manpower wise, you can't review all source code changes. Most of the time you're only verifying the build instructions and the functionality of the thing, not doing line by line code review. Though if people would like to start doing that, I would definitely I would welcome the help. Let's see, anything else come up in the chat?
I think that's it. This is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom. I'm gonna switch agenda topics now and go to Mike Lieberman. If you're ready, Mike. If not, we can chat a little bit more about Nix if people have more questions.
Sure. No, I can go, and I was actually just going to add one last thing to the Nix piece, which was I'm working with some folks on perhaps also sort of build it, having some of that Nix information eventually be able to sort of we can transform some of that information out of Nix into, hey, here is Nix generating Salsa Provenance. And actually that kind of ties into the thing I'm about to show off. Yeah, so we're doing some stuff, right? Yeah, where we can actually do that with Cyclone DX and actually generate Cyclone DX SBOMs out of that, and using similar tooling that we're kind of starting to write up. We can do the same thing with sort of Salsa Provenance. All right, so I'm gonna share in a second here. Oh, yeah. All right, and then let me go here. So this is real quick. It's sort of related. So just wanted to kind of bring up something that I've been poking around with, which is using QLang as a way to potentially generate Salsa Provenance based on like, hey, if I have a bunch of inputs, I can just sort of put it into code generated from QLang, or I can validate that a attestation statement is actually valid Salsa Provenance. Or it contains valid Salsa Provenance predicate. And so I know I have a code review open for this, but just to kind of run through real quickly what that sort of thing looks like, right? So this is what the Q schema looks like. Was looking around with some certain things like, hey, does it make sense for this thing to be a protobuf? Does it make sense for this to be a JSON schema and so on? QLang seems to be a little more extensible. It lets us sort of define constraints, like value constraints, which something like a protobuf doesn't really allow without some additional sort of code to sort of enforce those constraints. So, real quickly here, this is more or less I just followed through the spec and just sort of started writing up some code, right? Where hey, a digest set contains, and the question mark here just means it might contain a SHA-256, it might contain a SHA-224, so on and so forth. For now, ignore most of this regular expression stuff. The QLang folks are looking to sort of include, they're looking to sort of include, what was it, URI, I believe? Yeah, they're looking to include URI scheme stuff inside of the QLang language, where you could say, hey, is this a valid URI? Which is, I know, one of the things that we want to validate. For now, for testing purposes, I tried my best to sort of write a regular expression that could sort of interpret that. But if you look here, like it looks very similar to sort of JSON and what you would imagine it to look like here. But for the most part, it's just, hey, I'm expecting a type field, and that type field should be this, right? And it should contain, 0 or more subjects. It should contain a predicate type with this version. And then from there, it should have a type URI, which is, hey, I'm expecting something that matches a URI, and so on, right? Most of the other stuff is here, and so what I have here is I have like a test attestation. Just, I think I pulled and modified some things from one of the Tecton chains ones. And if I go in and I sort of like run this thing, right? Oh, hey, I have a field. Granted, I haven't set it up for it to be open so that additional fields just get ignored, which is, I know, more along the spec. But hey, I have a thing here. Okay, this thing is not supposed to be, you're not supposed to have that there. Whatever. Okay, so if I just do so. All right, so if I remove that there, save it, see, okay, now, and the other thing that I'm working with the Q team is to kind of get it to spit out all the violations all at once, as opposed to having to do it, run it multiple times. But here it's like, oh, here, for example, was, I know, actually, I worked with Priya to, on some of this, which was, oh, it turns out, chains was actually generating revision as opposed to something like SHA-256. And so now, if I do that, if no errors, it means it matched the provenance. Sorry, it matched the spec. So this is something that I think is useful from a couple of different ways. One is it helps validate that, yes, certain things are matching the spec. And so if you're writing something up, if we have something that is the spec as defined in something like this Q provenance, then we can go and validate that, yeah, okay, yes, if your thing matches the spec, then you can be pretty sure that your code works or whatever. And then eventually, I know that one of the other things that's being sort of discussed in the Q community is using this to actually generate stuff like Golang code or whatever, so that you can actually have similar to like protobuf generating Go code or whatever. You could have QLang specs that will actually generate the Go code that can be used to both either you could use both to validate that something coming in matches the spec, as well as create the structs and functions that somebody could just pass in these parameters, and output will be a valid a valid SLSA attestation. All right, that's it. Questions, comments?
This is really cool. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I don't know if you mentioned it, Michael, but Q can also import certain Go types and stuff too for schema validation.
Yes.
I know there are examples of doing that with like the Kubernetes types and stuff like that. So the other direction as well.
Oh, go ahead.
I was done.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So there's a couple of things. One is they have some built-in features for some of that. So for example, like time. So I can actually validate that this is a valid timestamp by using time.time here, which, And at some point, they're actually going to have this URI thing actually be that. I believe they actually can validate certain things. Like I believe they can validate that whether or not something is a valid IPv4 address. They can do that in the code, and they have some hooks for that. And then, I use Q also in the secure software factory, and we're actually using it along with Tecton and everything else to actually validate that our, the Tecton pipelines we're writing, the Tecton tasks we're writing, are they valid custom resources as defined by Tecton? And we can validate that actually at, quote unquote compile time, right? Like we can kind of say, hey, or at linting time, I should say, so that we know that we never actually try and push out a bad custom resource ever, because we can actually validate whether or not that custom resource is valid.
So one of the things I was going to ask on that, I don't know if you know, there's some like magic comments in the Kubernetes code base to express constraints on fields for, I think controller runtime can generate stuff for the open API schemas to do like, limited validation. I'm wondering whether there's been any work to either try and better standardize that stuff or encode that stuff into Q schemas. So if for instance, a particular string field can only take on certain values, right? Doing things like that, or, bounds on integer fields, those kinds of things, which Q can certainly do, but I don't know if it can import those kinds of things.
It could do a pretty good job at some of that. It's not, to be clear, it's not perfect. But let me see if I can bring it up real quick.
Well, specifically what I was wondering was whether anyone had looked at importing that, like it can import Go code, but there's some like fancy Kubernetes specific magic right now to do some of the constraints on those. I mean, because it's just Go structs, right, to define the actual schema. But the actual like constraints on fields for validation and stuff like that is not Go per se. It's definitely a postpass that Kubernetes tooling does today.
Yeah. On that front, I would have to double check with some of the folks. I mean, it does do some certain things, like it can actually interpret like the regular expressions that folks are using for validation. If I just share here, right? It can do some of this sort of stuff, right? Where it can, and this is generated based on.
Your screen's blank on my screen at least.
Oh.
Oh.
You see it? Oh, there we go. Yeah. So here's like, for example, a regular expression. There's a bunch of stuff in there that we've been pulling in a lot of this stuff, right? Like we have, let me see if there's some stuff in the Tecton, right, that we're able to pull through. Granted, some of it is kind of calling out to certain elements there, but yeah, if there's certain specific comments, that's where I'm not 100% sure. And I actually wasn't even aware that Kubernetes did that, so I'd have to kind of go in.
I think specifically in controller runtime controllers. So I can try and dig up an example for you, but it's still super cool. Thanks.
Yep, no problem.
Michael, I had like a more general question, I guess, like so the Salsa Provenance that we're pointing folks to now is in the in toto. It's the in toto one, right? So that's the one you're validating against.
Yeah, so we have the Salsa Provenance predicate is then the predicate is part of the Salsa attestation. Sorry, is part of the in toto attestation. So right now this is validating the whole thing. We could just as easily validate just purely the predicate if we wanted to.
I'm curious, like where might like your code, like the validation live if we wanted different ways, Q-Lang's awesome. And if we wanted to sort of capture these somewhere, is there open issue? People discuss, have we been discussing that?
Yeah, we've been discussing a little bit of that. based on like some stuff that Abhishek and a few other folks have brought up, it sounds like the salsa piece at least should be included as part of inside the salsa repo. I was starting to poke around with some of the salsa the in toto attestation folks about like maybe doing something similar, and then we can potentially, you know, separate it out where you can have something like attestation, right? Attestation validation happens at, you know, in the in toto repo. Predicate validation could happen at the salsa repo. You know, there's lots of different ways we can go about it. But then the other thing that would be really useful here, and this is something that I know a few folks have asked, is, and I'm going to try and do some of this, is generate a couple of different examples of, like, for example, passing or non-passing salsa provenance, so that people can both see that as examples of like, oh, this is what it should generally look like. And then those tests could be then used so that, you know, if we, for example, modify, you know, the spec, we can then modify the QLang spec to sort of be like a canonical representation of it, and then say, okay, what examples will fail now, so that we can show like, hey, the way you were doing it before, this is now a breaking change. This is not a new field that would normally be just ignored. This is by anything that's, you know, older. This is now something that, you know, you have to do it this way, otherwise it's going to break your code.
Another cool aspect I looked into for Q a couple months ago actually was trying to determine the level, the salsa level, given some provided set of like configuration on the user's part. So I say, hey, I trust this builder at L whatever, and inferring from the content which bits of the level requirements were met. I did run into a fair bit of trouble though. Like most of it just ended up shelling out to go, because it's kind of purposefully config, not purposefully, you know, language. But yeah, I think especially the idea of distributing like what a builder, let's say Tecton, is supposed to produce, and having that be consumable, yeah, as a spec by others, is a really valuable use of this sort of system.
Yeah, and on that front as well, like the one of the other things that another use case for this sort of thing, I think, as you mentioned, is potentially as a way to introduce policy. And there's a lot of stuff that folks are starting to do in the QLang language to make the hooks back into Go a little bit easier, and make some of the hooks throughout a lot of the stuff a little bit easier, so that you can easily say, okay, you know, if it must be, if I'm expecting like this builder to have one of these 50 IDs that's coming from a database, then, you know, you have like a hook in the config that can sort of do that, but you can still express the policy sort of more succinctly to say, hey, I'm expecting the salsa to look generally like this, and to have this sort of information, like, you know, it's, and this is, I know, for Matt, you know, this is the sort of stuff that we're talking about in the cosine task force and some of the other things, is like, how can we start to integrate this and stuff at like a policy layer. That's another reason why I started writing it out like this, is that we're starting to sort of develop policy around some of this. And so that the other nice thing about Q is everything I showed before, that whole spec, you can just sort of inherit that spec and can further constrain it just by, you know, very easily. You just say like, here, if I just share my screen again real quick, this hashtag provenance, if I wanted to further constrain it, I could just easily do that by just saying, you know, hashtag, you know, my provenance, and do something like, sorry, new keyboard, and something like this. I think there's an ampersand in there somewhere, but then you would just be able to further constrain it. And so from there, it would still inherit all the rules from this, but then I would be able to say, oh, not only does the URI must be must match the resource URI, but maybe it must be one of these 3 URI types that I trust. Something like that.
Very cool. We are running out of time. This was awesome, Michael. Let me just cover the last couple agenda items, and then if there's any last minute questions for Michael, we can probably throw them his way. Zach, I think Zach says he is leaving his company and he's on the steering committee. I'm not sure. I can't remember what the process is, but I think that we can follow up, and the steering committee can follow up and figure out next steps there. Someone asked when the next Solstice summit is. I'm not sure if we've had a Solstice summit yet, but that sounds really fun. We have these Salsa community meetings every 2 weeks at the same time. If we're interested in a summit, that could be fun in 2022. So definitely share ideas, and maybe we can all get together at some point when this silly pandemic is behind us. And then I just had quick intros for any new folks that want to say hello, or any last minute questions for Michael.
I'd like to say hello. I'm Sean Lowry. I'm working at Active State with Zach. And yeah, I'm basically working on all things build within Active State. So I work on everything from our ingestion pipeline, which reads data from upstream repositories, right through to actually producing the bits and the bill of materials that comes out at the other end. So basically, I deal with the entire supply chain in some place or other within Active State. So yeah, I'd love to schedule a demo of the Active State platform and talk about how we do hermetic builds and repeatable builds as well. So yeah, happy to do that for next session.
Awesome. Yeah, just toss it in the agenda for next time, and nice to meet you and welcome.
Hi, my name is Colin Lowe. I work for Qualcomm, and we're trying to adopt SLSA. And I work with a lady named Napita Sen, who I think has gotten in touch with Mark on some of this stuff. So we're definitely looking to adopt SLSA, and one of the biggest problems that we're having is trying to figure out the problems, especially since we don't use Git internally as a resource repository people. So we're trying to see if there's a way we can just, understanding the principle and the concept and adopt as much as we can. So appreciate the help you guys have. Thank you.
Awesome. Cool. Welcome.
Hey guys, I'm Tom from Bloomberg. We're also looking to adopt SLSA. I think it's my first meeting. So really interesting stuff. I look forward to learning more.
Nice. Welcome.
And I'll speak up again. Aaron Bakke already said hello earlier, but I'm with Verizon. So part of the incubator space. So it's kind of a green field. I'm specifically kind of overseeing the DevSecOps from a central perspective. And, they're looking for the traditional DevSecOps, the security testing, et cetera. That's kind of where I come from. But I want to introduce supply chain security as part of that at the same time. So I'm excited to get together with y'all.
Very cool. What's your cat's name?
My cat's name is Jinx.
Jinx. Awesome. Yeah. All right.
Hi.
Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Ivan Teblin from SUSE. We are looking also for adopt SLSA and security supply chain tracking approach, and our operating system features very similar certifications like common criteria, evaluation level for plus, which is very, very close to what's going on. And so looking to mix and match and adapt those approaches. Thanks.
Hi, I work with Yvonne. I'm Blaine Stone. I'm the Certification Compliance Program Manager at SUSE, and he already gave you a rundown of what we're looking to do.
Awesome. Welcome. Lots of new folks. This is awesome. If we've missed you and you want to say hi, we have a Slack channel. Definitely drop a line in there and keep the conversation going. And with that, I think we're out of time. So great meeting all you new folks. Thanks again for the demos. These are awesome. And we'll see you all in a few weeks.
Thank you.
Yeah.